The Confederate submarine, the H.L. Hunley, small, crudely built, a pole or spar protruding from the bow to hold an explosive charge. This is the way we imagine it, a replica sitting outside the Charleston Museum. But no one really knows anymore what the Hunley actually looked like. That's why in the summer of 2000 there was so much interest in one of the most important efforts in the history of naval archaeology, the raising of the Hunley. Hello, I'm David Stanton. The Hunley has fascinated us for more than a century, and for good reason. She was the first submarine to sink a ship in battle. It would be 50 years before that would happen again. She disappeared after signaling the success of her mission. No one has ever known what led to her demise. And then there is the courage of her crew, laboring in cramped quarters with barely enough air to breathe and knowing full well the vessel had claimed the lives of 2 previous crews. To their families, to the Confederacy, even to their Union enemies, the people who built and sailed the Hunley represented courage, innovation, and a commitment to get the job done no matter what the consequences to themselves. The history of the Hunley is quite a story, as reporter Jack Kinsey explains.
Horace Lawson Hunley believed the Confederacy needed a warship that could sail underwater. He was not the first to have that idea.
In fact, while Hunley played a vital role in developing, financing, and even testing a submarine that looked probably something like this model at the State Museum, the concept of submarines as military weapons was hardly new. It dated back at least to the Revolutionary War. And a 3-man prototype known as the Pioneer was already under construction in New Orleans by the time Captain Hunley became involved in using submarines against the Union Navy. Now, Captain Hunley was a lawyer and a businessman, and he had plenty of money, and he was almost obsessed with the idea of breaking the Union naval blockade. So he paid for construction of a second submarine, the American Diver, also known as the Pioneer II.
The Pioneer would never get beyond the experimental stage. Union attacks led by Captain David Farragut would force the Confederates to scuttle the sub and retreat to Mobile, Alabama.
Now, the Hunley itself was powered by a hand crank, but the inventors of the American Diver first tried moving that sub through the water using an electric motor and later a steam engine, but they didn't work, and the sub itself was eventually lost at sea.
The Confederates set to work one more time. This time, a longer, more hydrodynamic vessel powered by twice as many men as the Pioneer II. In an early test, the sub, now named after Captain Hunley, dives under a boat on the Mobile River while towing a floating torpedo. When the torpedo makes contact, the boat explodes. The experiment is a success, and the Hunley is ready for battle. First, a change of location. August 1863. The Hunley arrives by train in Charleston, South Carolina, where coastal waters are deeper, the stakes for the Confederacy higher. Since the first shots of the war fired on Fort Sumter, Charleston has been under heavy bombardment. But an early outing proves disastrous for the Hunley and her crew. Near a dock, an accident sends the sub down with its hatches open. 5 men die. Their graves found only recently below the football field at the Citadel. The bodies now rest at Charleston's Magnolia Cemetery.
Whatever their reason, it took unimaginable courage to climb down into that boat and then move about in Charleston Harbor against tide and time.
Shortly after the sinking, a Charleston sailor named Gus Smythe writes to his aunt.
We had quite a sad accident yesterday. A machine we had here in which carried 8 or 10 men by some mismanagement filled with water and sank. It has quite a gloom over us. Strange, isn't it? That while we hear with indifference of men being killed all around us, the drowning of one should affect us so.
If bringing the Hunley back to the surface is an extraordinary task today, it is certainly no easier in 1863. The sub, now an iron tomb, is raised from more than 40 feet of water. Then a second crew, this one led by Captain Hunley himself. But during a training run, tragedy again strikes. Hunley and a crew of 7 men failed to resurface after a dive. Ironically, at least one account suggests the sinking may have been Hunley's fault. Hoisted up and brought to shore a second time, the submarine is placed under the command of Lieutenant George Dixon. While Dixon already has experience with the sub, the commander of Charleston defenses is ready to give up on the project.
I can have nothing more to do with that submarine boat. It's more dangerous to those who use it than the enemy.
Now equipped with a torpedo at the end of a movable iron spar, the Hunley and yet another crew are ready for their historic mission. On the night of February 17, 1864, they sail from Breach Inlet between Sullivan's Island and what is now the Isle of Palms.
It was a absolute amazing achievement of personal bravery under fire. I mean, what we're talking about here are volunteers who got on board an untried vessel that sank twice before.
4 miles out, under heavy small arms fire, the Hunley rams the torpedo into the side of the Union ship Housatonic. The mighty ship sinks, taking 5 crew members with her. The Hunley signals victory. A blue lantern flashed to the Confederate forces on shore. And then, she disappears.
Over the years, any number of adventurers would try to find the wreck. The showman P.T. Barnum once offered a $100,000 reward, but the Hunley eluded searchers until the mid-90s. Adventurer and best-selling author Clive Cussler generally is credited with discovering the sub.
I walked around, I think, Nome for a couple of days before it finally began to sink in. You know, my God, we found it.
The Hunley rests in about 30 feet of water, lying on its side, largely buried by sand. From what divers can see in the murky water, the Hunley is in remarkably good condition. The wreck is about 4 miles offshore, directly out from Breach Inlet, where the submarine's journey began. In the summer of 2000, a massive platform and crane stand poised at the site. They were brought here by a group called the Friends of the Hunley, who intend to recover the sub and conserve her. The project is led by the U.S. Navy's chief archaeologist, Robert Neeland.
The Hunley in itself provides certain problems because it is so intact and it's so pristine that it's like recovering an egg, that you need to be especially careful and think out very well what you're going to do and what your next move is going to be.
August 8th, after months of work, Neeland and his team are ready to raise the Hunley and reveal this mystery of the deep.
The sun has not quite broken through yet, but it is much lighter than it was about 15 minutes ago, and we're starting to see what's going on around the Carlissa B and the Hunley site. As a matter of fact, that area right behind me right there, if you can see where those 2 yellow floats are, right in between that barge and the end of the crane barge platform, that's where the Hunley is, and that's where she'll be brought up sometime this morning.
Dozens of boats surround the recovery platform. One boat is for dignitaries, including South Carolina Governor Jim Hodges.
The more I've read about the Hunley, the more fascinating it is. This is an important piece of maritime history as well as Civil War history.
From WIS News, this is a special report, Raising the Hunley.
And good morning, everyone. Welcome to this special edition of Raising the Hunley. I'm Judy Gadsden.
And I'm David Stanton. The H.L. Hunley is expected to see the light of day this morning.
David, you can feel the level of excitement starting to raise now as they get prepared to raise the Hunley. If you look behind me now, you can see in the area right off the end of the floating barge crane called the Carlissa B, there is a large crane line that's now extending into the water. That crane line has been attached, or is in the process of being attached, to the truss that will form the support for the Hunley as it's being brought off the ocean floor. There have been a couple of new developments since we last spoke to you. In addition to the fact that the divers are down there and that line is down there, there is now a very large barge over on the other end of the Carlissa B. That was brought in here just a few minutes ago. We were told originally that it was going to be attached to the smaller barge that will carry the Hunley to stabilize it, but in fact what's going to happen is it's going to be anchored right there, and it's going to stabilize the wave action so that there's more of a calm area right behind the Carlissa B to keep the smaller barge that'll carry the Hunley from bouncing around too much. Very critical that that barge not be moving up and down too much, because it's going to be a very delicate process to bring the sub out of the water and lift it over on top of that barge, place it down very gingerly so as not to disturb the contents or to perhaps structurally damage the sub. We do have a little bit of a weather development that has been taking place over the last 45 minutes or so. There is a darkened sky behind us at this point. There has been some talk of rain moving over our area. That is not necessarily a bad thing, except for the photographers that are on this boat, the Carolina Clipper. It might be a good thing for the researchers here, because that rain would keep the sub wet. It's very important that the sub be kept wet, because that would minimize the exposure to salt water, to oxygen, and to the oxidation process. That would keep the sub from deteriorating any further on its journey back into Charleston Harbor. So right now we're waiting for the signal. The divers are down. They are getting ready to make sure that everything is in place. Within the next 30 minutes or so, it's very possible we could see the beginning of the lifting process. We're told, as a matter of fact, that it could happen at any time. And we were told some time ago by Senator Glenn McConnell, who's been instrumental in the recovery process and in getting the state's support for this project. He is the chairman of the State Hunley Commission, that once the signal to begin the lift has begun, it is going to be, there's going to be no turning back. That is a 4-minute process from ocean floor to the surface, and they only have one chance to do it right. They're going to do it when the conditions are absolutely perfect. In the meantime, a very large flotilla of all kinds of private craft have been assembled outside where we are right now. As I look around me right now, I see probably at least 100 boats, all shapes and sizes, from the Coast Guard to fishing trawlers to small 17-foot ski boats. There's even somebody out here in a kayak.
Jack, there is some uncertainty involved with this and how strong the Hunley will be after 134 years, right?
Sure, there are all kinds of concerns. There's the natural corrosion process which would take place on the ocean floor. There's always been some speculation as to the exact reason for the Hunley going down in the first place, and one of the theories is that the concussion of the explosion from the torpedo that sank the USS Housatonic might have popped some rivets or damaged some seams where the plates are joined together on the Hunley, and that might have been instrumental in why it sank, and also might have caused it some structural weakness that would create some problems. However, there are some other factors in the favor of the preservation of the Hunley itself. In part, the concretion that has formed around the Hunley, the material that has been deposited around it on the ocean floor, can act as sort of a protective shield, sort of a glue that will hold together some parts of the iron structure. One of the areas that they're really concerned about is the bolts, the rivets that went through the exterior portion of the Hunley, the places where the plates were joined together. The bolts have a tendency, according to the scientific investigation, the bolts have a tendency to corrode faster than perhaps the sheet metal itself. And if that is the case, then the bolts could be a point of weakness in the raising. Of course, there's also the contents inside. There's a great deal of sediment and sand inside. That creates much more weight inside.
Jack, one of the things that they had to do before they brought it up was patch the holes. There were 3 holes that they found in the Hunley.
Correct. There were 3 holes, one in the bow, one right by the forward hatch. In fact, it was in the forward hatch where the viewport was located at one time, and then a 3rd hole, almost a gash in the back on the stern, right at the top, right in front of the propeller. That one has been capped with a sort of hard plastic material. The other 2 holes have been plugged with plastic bags filled with foam. That will keep any of the contents inside, the sediment and any artifacts that might be inside, excuse me, from leaking out once the lift begins, and of course during the transportation of the Hunley.
And we're looking at live pictures from Fort Moultrie now. This is on Sullivan's Island, and this is the area where the last soldiers to get a signal from the Hunley, the blue lamp signal, saw that after it sank the Housatonic, and then later it went down. One of the great mysteries that we think will be uncovered as scientists are able to go over the Hunley when they get it up. But today, some folks are going to be there at Fort Moultrie, and as the Hunley passes by, they're going to hold a blue lantern light up in commemoration of that.
We are told that we are now getting the 10-minute warning, so we're about 10 minutes away from the actual lift. They're telling us here on the Carolina Clipper. Stand by. I think we just had a change. We're now saying 1 minute before they begin the lift process. So get ready, folks. This is about to happen now.
Lifting the sub requires a complicated feat of engineering. First, the recovery team buries pilings at both ends of the site. A steel frame or truss is lowered over the craft and onto the pilings. Then divers begin removing the sediment under the Hunley. And one by one, they slip nylon straps padded with foam-filled bags beneath the sub. The straps are attached to the frame above. The Hunley is now suspended and ready to be brought up.
There are two divers who are up on the surface now. It looks like one is near the cage. In fact, I believe I see the possibility there's all three divers that are actually up over the surface now.
Yeah.
That would indicate that they're just about ready to go. But it looks to me like it's being brought up.
We can actually see the top of the truss.
Absolutely. Coming out of the water
Well, that
right
will
now.
be, yep, I see it now too. I see just the top of that steel truss that forms the support structure over the Hunley. There you go.
There it is, Jack.
What a remarkable sight.
And you can see it's tilted at about a 45-degree angle. They brought it up just as it lay on the bottom of the ocean, 30 feet down.
Exactly. You can see those
That's
straps
incredible.
up underneath. That cushioning we talked about before to lift it in an exact position to keep the vessel intact. And looks like all of their technology, all of the work that they did to figure out exactly how to do this is certainly paying off.
This is quite a moment. 136 years ago, that sub went down at this exact spot, and now it is out of the water for the first time. And those sailors on board are beginning the final leg of their journey. They were trying to get home. This time they're going to do it.
And Jack, this is a remarkable achievement on a number of levels. Obviously, there's the historical importance of the first sub to sink an enemy vessel. It would be 50 years before that feat would be duplicated in World War I. And then you've got the artifacts that you just mentioned. What historians and scientists will learn about the way this sub was constructed and how technologically advanced the people were. In fact, one of the relatives of the man who began the Singer sewing machine company was involved with this. Also a relative of Eli Whitney, the founder of the cotton gin, so that's quite a genesis.
We're getting a really terrific profile view of it right now. As you can see, as it's kind of hanging in the air right now, David and Judy, you can make out a very distinct shape. You can see the two conning towers, forward and the stern conning tower. You can see the propeller shroud. You can see a very good idea of what this sub looked like. And as you can see in the front, we had this belief for many years, and if you look at some of the models that were done, you see that the bow area is actually kind of slanted as opposed to some of the previous conceptions, which indicated that the bow was square. It was kind of perpendicular to the rest of the craft. But if you look at it right now, I think you can see that the very front part of the sub was sort of like the front of your regular ship. It's kind of slanted in. So, I mean, we're going to find out an awful lot about this craft that we've just never had any indication of before. There just wasn't very much literature about this. There wasn't a lot of writing. And, of course, because this was a secret weapon, a lot of the drawings and architectural designs and so forth just don't exist anymore. We'll also find perhaps a number of artifacts that are not directly related to the sub. There's a very good possibility because of the sediment and the sand inside, because so much has been preserved because of the anaerobic environment inside the sub. We may find things like clothing. We may find some indication of photographs, documents, who knows. One of the things they're certainly going to be looking for is that $20 gold piece that Lieutenant Dixon supposedly had with him as a lucky charm after his wounding at Shiloh. They're going to be looking for that, the bell-shaped gold piece that supposedly stopped the bullet that was going to hit his leg, perhaps saved his life. That will be sort of the holy grail of this search as the forensic
work begins and the archaeological expedition begins inside the Hunley. The people who were inside must have been working in absolutely unbelievably difficult conditions. Not much air inside, very little light. They attacked at dark. The only thing they had guiding them was Lieutenant Dixon had a candle, and there was a candle in the forward hatch, and that's the way he read the compass, and that's the way he could read the mercury gauge that was inside that would tell them just how deep they were diving once they were underwater. But outside of that, they had no source of illumination other than the natural light coming in these few glass ports on the top of the sub, and at night that wasn't much light. So these guys are inside for 4 miles, cranking like crazy, heading towards the enemy, which is more than likely going to try to blow them out of the water once they're detected. They have very little air inside. There's the only source of air they have is the open hatches, if they're open at all, and most of the time they were not, and the snorkels on top. Now, the snorkels, from all historical accounts, perhaps never even worked. If you watch the movie, if you read some of the historical documentation, there's a very good indication that the snorkels were pretty much inoperative. So the only air they had inside was the air that was inside once they closed the hatch and began traveling forward. If they were underwater, they could actually stay underwater for as much as 2.5 hours. They did tests. Lieutenant Dixon took the crew down to the bottom of the water at a couple points, checked to see how long they could stay under. They could stay under for 2.5 hours before they completely ran out of air and had to surface. But one indication of how much air they would have inside, as a matter of fact, was the candle. Once the candle went out, which would go out after like around 25 minutes or so, they knew that they had to get air soon.
Like the
So
bird
you
in the
must
mining
imagine that
cave.
this was a very, very difficult physical task for these soldiers, not to mention the fact that they were sailing right into the teeth of the enemy. Charleston Harbor was completely blockaded at that point. The Housatonic was armed to the teeth. It was a man of war. It was a sloop of war. And it was ready to fire on the Hunley. And they knew, as a matter of fact, the Union soldiers knew that there was some possibility that the Confederates had a torpedo boat, and that at some point during the blockade, and especially at night, they might be attacked by this thing. So they were on guard. They just couldn't react fast enough. The Hunley managed to make it in, attach the torpedo, and explode the Housatonic in exactly the right place in order to blow up its powder magazine. But outside of that, you know, these guys had an amazing feat before them. The fact that they managed to pull it off to the extent that they did is just remarkable even today. This is a very, very difficult and delicate point at the of the recovery effort. The crane operator has to be very exact here, and as the waves continue to kind of push the barge around and the wind pushes that crane a little bit, they want to make absolutely sure that it is placed squarely and firmly and securely on that barge in the most delicate way possible so as not to jostle the contents too much. People applauding now as they've lowered the truss onto the top of the barge, and you can hear the boats around here starting to honk their horns.
And Jack, the flotilla has grown, as we saw from WIS Newshawk just a moment ago. It looks like about twice as many boats as there were an hour ago, perhaps.
Oh yeah, there are probably a couple hundred boats out here, I would imagine. They're just all over the place. Coast Guard doing a great job of keeping people clear of the site.
Nearby, author Clive Cussler dives off the press boat and swims to one of the boats from his organization, Numa. Champagne in hand, he celebrates the successful lift. With the Hunley now safely on the barge, the recovery crew hooks up a system of hoses and sprinklers to keep the sub wet as it heads towards the conservation lab. And then, with the fleet of Hunley fans acting as escorts, the submarine continues its long interrupted journey home. And it is a spectacular homecoming. An armada of boats, ships, even personal watercraft, many flying Confederate flags. They surround the Hunley, filling Charleston Harbor. On board one of them, State Senator Ernie Passoleg, a member of the Hunley Commission.
It took a lot of effort on our part and a lot of discomfort to get out to the site. You can imagine what those fellows went through on that fateful night.
The Hunley cruises towards Charleston stern first, but still tilted to her starboard side. In the bright sunshine, the Hunley's main features are easy to see. They include the hole in the forward conning tower, plugged up by divers with a plastic bag. Some theories suggest the hole might have been the result of gunfire from the Housatonic, gunfire that might have wounded or killed Lieutenant Dixon and caused the sub to sink. The Hunley passes Fort Sumter, birthplace of the war, where flags fly at half-staff. Then past Fort Moultrie, where thousands wait to get a glimpse of the submarine's historic return.
Do you see it, Jen? Yeah, you can see it really good now.
Oh, we have our camcorder and we have our snapshot camera, and yeah, we have the VCR going at home.
I've been watching it since 5:30 this morning and just been excited about just seeing a wonderful part of history.
We need to learn so much more about the history and how they did this and give them a final resting place for all their valor.
At Stella Maris Catholic Church on Sullivan's Island, bells ring, as they soon will all over the Charleston area. The Hunley and her escorts churn their way towards Patriots Point, where another huge crowd waits on the deck of the aircraft carrier Yorktown. The spectators include a group of women dressed as the widows and mothers of the 9 Hunley crewmen.
There's a reverence. There's a reverence here, you know, to bring the Hunley and the men back up. And I think it's a learning experience.
Just as we would have a ceremony honoring a modern soldier from the Vietnam or Korean Wars, so too today.
The experience leaves reenactor Gary Dow at a loss for words.
It's joy, elation, relief, respect. It's amazing. I just can't. I can't put a word to it. It's an emotion I don't think I have ever felt before. I know that there are 9 people watching us today. I know there are 9 sets of eyes here watching today. And I'm wondering what they think about all this.
As the Hunley draws near, she's greeted by cannon fire, a blue lantern held high, the signal of her success, and roses thrown into the water by the women left behind. But the pageantry does not mark the end of the Hunley's journey. She steams under the bridges linking Charleston and Mount Pleasant, headed towards the old Navy base and the lab that will be her next home. There, another giant crane lifts the sub onto land for the first time since she was launched by the Confederacy. With more reenactors standing guard, the Hunley now rolls gently to the newly named Warren Lash Conservation Lab. Inside, another crowd waits to witness one of the most difficult maneuvers yet, getting the Hunley in the door and into the 50-foot tank where she'll be excavated and preserved.
It's wonderful and it's cool.
Among the spectators, Richard Barker, great-grandson of Hunley crew member James Wicks.
I just think he was brave, and he must have been dedicated. He has four daughters and a wife to leave behind, and I think that was dedication to a cause.
Slowly and with impressive precision, the Hunley is carried by twin 20-ton hoists the final few yards up, over and into the cold water tank. Senator Glenn McConnell begins one final ceremony.
If these men could stand at this facility today, I believe their words would be too. Thank you.
And then, as members of the Charleston clergy give blessings, the Hunley and her crew rest once again. The Hunley will remain undisturbed for several months as scientists scan her with X-rays and try to determine the best way to open the hull for excavation. By November, that work will begin. The sediment will be removed bit by bit. The scientists hope to find out more about how the Hunley worked. They'll search for Lieutenant Dixon's $20 gold piece. And because the silt may have preserved the crew's remains, the recovery team has prepared a morgue just a few feet from the tank. Plans are already being made to bury the remains at Charleston's Magnolia Cemetery in what will be another memorable ceremony. So, while the saga of the Hunley is not over, the submarine is home. And people all over the world again recognize her crewmen for their bravery and their sacrifice. I'm David Stanton.
And welcome to maybe a bit of WIS history.